Max Ventura from East Bay Pesticide Alert, also known as Don't Spray California. Our website's don'tspraycalifornia.org. So we're facing it right now with the light brown apple moth program. This little moth has been called, it's been given a Class A pest status. And what this means is that it's being called an emergency. And why this is relevant in this whole situation is that when a pest is labeled a Class A pest, this gives the CDFA and the USDA the sort of go-ahead to go around and avoid environmental impact assessments and reports. They say it's an emergency, we've got to go now, and we've got to go, and they get special dispensation to use things which have never been used before, like the pesticides in this program are now specially okayed for this program. And so that's all related to the fact that it's a Class A pest, so to speak. So now we faced this with our group, East Bay Pesticide Alert, in 2005, when we found out the city of Oakland was being pressured to use pesticides in the hills. Now, some people here might live in Oakland and might have been aware of the Wildfire Prevention Assessment District in the hills. Connie was involved in this too, with the Environmental Health Network. The city of Oakland has about 1,000 acres. UC has a bunch of acreage up there. PG&E, EBMA, the East Bay Regional Parks District, and other agencies have a bunch of land up there that they oversee. The city of Oakland had passed something they called a ban against pesticides about a decade ago. And yet, it was a city councilwoman, Jean Kwan, who was pushing for the use of herbicides in the hills. And we went, okay, something's up, let's find out. And we showed up with toxicology for the pesticides being planned, that were being used by other agencies and that they were pressuring the city of Oakland to use, and we went, something's not right. We had a creeks organization, Friends of Saucil Creek, that unfortunately was pushing for herbicide use, and we went, this doesn't make sense. And since that time, we've heard about many creeks groups pushing for herbicide use. I encountered that when we lived in Sonoma. Creek? Yeah. So groups that are working around saving watersheds, you know, and they work around doing cleanup of creeks when there's debris in the creeks, but they also work around, often increasingly frequently, we hear people talking about non-native plants in creeks. But associated with that, non-native plants in creeks, we keep hearing, gotta use herbicides, gotta use herbicides, gotta use herbicides. And I was encountering this about a decade ago in Sonoma, where the Sonoma, I think it's called the Sonoma Ecology Center, they put out a video that was specifically saying we've got to use herbicides in Sonoma Creek around, I think it's called Arundodonax. I can't remember the name exactly, but in, you know, something that was considered non-native was called invasive. That word invasive was used all the time. And we were going, this isn't the answer. You know, the answer is organizing, and the answer is getting people out to do the manual work of removal, if that's actually warranted. But David Theodoropoulos, I think, is going to challenge us on whether that's actually warranted all the time. So, are you close to your point?
I should be just about ready.
So one of the things we have been finding, you'll hear from Daniel Harder more about this, is that we've been sort of led down a path for the last, at least 15 years, toward thinking if something's not native to this area, we've just got to be rid of it. But what we were bringing up in 2005 in the Oakland Hills is, wait a minute, monarchs have acclimated. If you get rid of the eucalyptus, you're going to have a problem. I mean, the monarchs are going to have a problem. You might not, but the monarchs are going to. And down the line, you will too, because we have a very layered and beautiful ecosystem, and we don't know what the result will be of removing one thing from that ecosystem. So that issue of acclimation is one we all, I think, would do well to remember, and we'll hear more about the importance of acclimation.
My field is invasion biology, and so what I'm hoping is that what I can tell you about invasion biology are methods that you can apply to the light brown apple moth. You can apply it to any species that they call an invasive species or a non-native. Sorry, this is kind of hurried here. Okay, if you take home one word from this talk, just one word, remember Monsanto. Every time you hear the term invasive species, just remember Monsanto. Okay. Okay, I was busy setting up, so I didn't catch what she covered, but okay, during the last couple of decades, we keep hearing this stuff about non-native species that are invading ecosystem and displacing the native species. These are themes that's a constant drumbeat. They're said to harm ecosystem processes. They're said to reduce biodiversity. They're said to create monocultures of no use to native wildlife, and so that they're ecologically harmful. Now, there's agricultural weeds where you can say that, well, the weed infests the field and it displaces the farmer's crop, so you can say, you can define harm that way, but these people are defining this as ecological harm, which is a very different thing. Okay, here's some of the rhetoric these people use. These are quotes. Quote, "Tall fescue grasslands can be seen as a cancer, and a drastic disease of the landscape requires drastic measures." In other words, herbicide. That's how they justify the herbicide. Quote, "I just hate them. They are genetically deviant miscreants that have no rightful place on this planet. We all have to be part of this war on weeds." Quote, "Park rangers, scientists, and others are locked in combat with unrelenting armies of exotics." Notice the war metaphors. So they're taking the war, the militaristic mindset into the wildlands. Okay, quote, again, "Fighting them is like a war, a drama filled with invasions and counterattacks." Okay, there's something really deeply wrong here. I mean, I feel it. I hope you can feel it. So compare this. This is from a member of the Standing Rock Sioux tribe. He said, "Lands left to themselves invite the compatible creatures to live on and with them. Therefore, whatever kinds of creatures begin to inhabit reserved lands within an ecological restoration project should be allowed to prosper. They should also be closely observed so that their role in the restoration and recovery of the land can be discovered." Now that's a kind of a different attitude. So I want to ask you, which of these two attitudes makes your heart glad? And which way do you want to live in the world? Okay, invasionists, these are the people who are spreading this invasive species stuff. They're trying to reimpose the whole control-addicted land domination philosophy on, they're imposing this on wildlands, and they're trying to drag us back down into that nightmare that we've been trying to awaken from. They want us to start attacking the wildlands and making the wildlands into what we say they should be. Like, this species doesn't belong there. Only these species belong there. It's like this is human beings controlling the wild. The wild, by definition, has to be free. Human freedom is a very important thing that I've spent my life working for, and the freedom of all living beings is very important. Okay, I better get on this side. So what is native, right? First we have to examine what this concept is. Okay, if you learn history, this concept evaporates. For example, tropical plants moved up into Alaska when the planet was warmer than it is now. Followed by, during the ice ages, northern conifers reached the Gulf states. Okay, let's see. Oh, this is difficult. Okay. I know I'm going to go over time. Sorry, just get out the meat hook if I go over time. Okay, these slides are representations of evolutionary radiations of creatures. This is a type of turtle. These are bovids. That's like cattle and bison. You can see they evolved in one area and radiated to other areas. Okay, camels, anteaters, armadillos, and sloths all evolved here in North America, and then they radiated to other parts of the world and became extinct here. So if they hadn't invaded to other continents, those whole groups, whole lineages would be extinct. Bear and deer are actually recent immigrants to North America. Along with the bison, which is a symbol of Native America. The bison came here from Eurasia, I think only about 2 million years ago. 13 different stocks. Oh, wait a minute, what was that? Well, 13 different stocks of elephants, mammoths, and mastodons. That group began in Africa, they radiated out, and they walked all the way into North America and South America. And there were elephants, essentially, mammoths, mastodons, right here where we're sitting today, just thousands of years ago, with essentially the same vegetation that you see around you. It wasn't like it was a completely different ecosystem. And yeah, they were here until only 7,500 years ago. Horses evolved here and were present here until just 6,000 years ago. Native Americans hunted them. And now that they've returned 500 years ago, they're now being exterminated as invaders in the arid Intermountain West. Yeah, sorry, I'm not better prepared, and I'm exhausted. Okay. Okay, forests ebb and flow across the earth, and they also change in content. They'll change from like oak to conifer to beech to birch. There's this constant turnover. This is all from pollen studies in lake beds. Okay, is anything native to Minnesota, which was a lifeless ice desert just 12,000 years ago? It was buried under a slab of glacial ice. A friend of mine that teaches at Arizona State University, she likes to point out to her students that all of the characteristic native vegetation they see, Palo Verde, saguaro cacti, mesquite, creosote bush, they're all newcomers, and that human beings have lived in that area longer than these plants. Yeah. There's just been this tremendous change. It's like, yeah, read paleobiology. It's great. It's really great stuff. It'll make you really relax about the world because you realize it's okay. Things always change. Change is not harm. We don't need to fear change. We don't need to fear whether it's plants or people or other organisms moving around the planet. The planet is the home, the rightful home of all living beings. What?
Chemicals were fearing. Chemical death.
Yeah. Oh, but actually, okay, just to be sort of contrary there, did you know that there's a bee in, I think it's Guatemala or Costa Rica, that makes polystyrene? It makes its combs out of polystyrene. It secretes two chemicals. And that actually, to me, is good news because that means there's something in the Guatemalan ecosystem that breaks down polystyrene, so we should go there and look. Yeah, and a lot of things that, there's actually a lot of chemicals that were original, that we first knew them when they were synthesized in the laboratory by the chemist, but they're found in nature. Like there's a guy, Tom Eisner at Cornell, that studies this whole chemical ecology. And I saw a presentation of his, and he was saying, see these little white droplets that are being secreted on the side of this beetle? Those are almost pure Valium. Okay. And I've lost my lost my plate in the slides. Okay, this movement is ongoing. It's not just limited to the past. In 50 years, 1,100 species crossed open ocean to regreen and re-inhabit the sterile rock remnants of Krakatoa after it erupted. A boa constrictor large enough to kill sheep arrived on the island of St. Vincent on a floating log. The African cattle egret landed in South America by its own power across the Atlantic, and from that landfall in 1945, it has since spread throughout the Americas, from I think Labrador to Patagonia. There are South African copepods in Finland that were brought there probably on migrating terns. So these things continue to happen, and in fact, jays, like blue jays, they are key dispersers of acorns because they cache them, and they selectively cache them in areas that are favorable for oak recruitment. Sorry, let me translate out of that. That means just like a good place for them to grow. Sorry if I slip into the technical language. It's, you know, it's just one of those things. Okay, primates. Us and our monkey ancestors are key seed dispersers in tropical forests. So when we move things around, this is part of our evolutionary heritage. In fact, Dan Jansen down in Costa Rica found there are 2 types of dry tropical forests that form naturally. One is from wind dispersed seeds, and it's a fairly species-poor forest. Another one is dispersed by mammals, and it's much more diverse. It's by the seeds carried by mammals, and both of these types are entirely natural and both persist for centuries. It's like, yeah, remember that. It's not. Remember the old thing like the earth does not belong to us, but we belong to the earth. No, we are the earth. We are nature. We are a part of nature. Don't let them separate you from nature like they've been doing for centuries in order to make you into just consumers or whatever their plan is. Okay, this dispersal that I've been describing is actually essential for maintaining biodiversity. And in fact, studies of artificially created ecosystems has shown that the greater the rate of invasion of species into an ecosystem, the greater the resulting biodiversity of that ecosystem. And this is confirmed by the fossil record. You find places like the Isthmus of Panama, where it's alternately been submerged, so it's a corridor for oceanic organisms, or it's above land, so it's a corridor for terrestrial organisms between continents. The areas that have invasion are the most biodiverse. Invasion biology, it's mired in this old discredited ecology, which of like things like equilibrium communities and the balance of nature. Nature is not balanced. Nature is imbalance. That's what creates the diversity. That's what creates evolution. If the world was balanced, we'd still be bacteria. We would never have evolved. Also, modern ecological theory is finding that ecosystems actually self-organize towards these critical states that are highly susceptible to catastrophic events like fire in a forest. And so the ecosystem builds itself to this point where these catastrophic events will occur, and those events are, again, they're essential for creating and maintaining landscape-level diversity. Let's see, okay. Also, they talk about, well, these are co-evolved ecosystems, right? These organisms have co-evolved. Again, that's not true. No credible ecologist has believed that for a couple of decades. All the evidence from the fossil record indicates that because of these movements, right, all ecosystems are accustomed to receiving new species, losing species. It's like, someone moves into your neighborhood, they integrate everything, it's just, there's no problem. That's the natural order of things. Okay, let's see. Oh, yeah, and the species interactions, they're constantly forming and they're coupling and uncoupling. So it's not like, you see, that's the whole clockwork mechanistic view of nature. It's an ancient ecology. It goes back to the misinterpretations of Darwin and the tragedies that led to. Okay, let's see where we are. Okay, yeah, so these slides are just stuff for when I talk with academics, to show them I did my homework. Okay. Okay, yeah, and here, okay, this is the way I like to describe some of this. I like to say, okay, if you take all of the really complex equations that describe ecosystem processes and evolutionary processes, and you put them all into like a graphics generating computer, you get this. You see, this is life. You see, we have time, energy flow, and the edge of chaos there, and all species were just surfing the edge like that. It's this dynamic living thing. It's not a static clockwork. Okay, invasion, like I was saying, it's entirely natural. See, this invading monoculture, it's a pure monoculture of one species invading a meadow. This is our native bracken fern. Okay, there it is. See, dense monoculture. It inhabits an area, and in fact, like some of the things where they scare you, they say the invader changes ecosystem processes. In fact, bracken changes soil chemistry, and it can persist for centuries. So that monoculture patch could persist for centuries, but it's a completely natural thing. Let's see. Wish my eyes weren't going so bad.
You want a flashlight?
No, it's okay. I didn't take my uncle's advice. He told me, don't get old. Okay, a lot of times you'll find what I observed, what clued me into this, like in fact when I was in high school, is you'll notice these invaders are generally disturbance indicators. In other words, like a road cut or an area with where there's some sort of a human change, which is changing the structure of the community. Let's see. Okay, yeah, you see, it's disturbance. A lot of things cause these things. There's direct clearing of vegetation, changes in fire frequency. When the immigrants displaced the American Indians in California, it completely changed things because the Indians frequently burned in order to maintain the landscape. So if you change the fire regime, either adding fire, changing the time of year that it comes, or suppressing fire, you're going to completely change the composition of the ecosystem. I mean, this is just basic ecology. Okay, another thing, they say that invaders decrease diversity. This is absolutely not true. In every case, including even oceanic islands like Hawaii, man-introduced species have increased biological diversity. They've increased alpha diversity, which is the number of species, beta diversity, which is like the rate of change of species turnover as you go across the landscape, as well as omega diversity, which is phylogenetic diversity, which is like the difference between like an elephant and a fern. That's a type of diversity. Okay, and so anyway, there are no theoretical limits to diversity. Okay, so reality check. Okay, have you all heard of purple loosestrife? Okay, that's one of the plants that they're spraying for up in Northern California along the rivers. Okay, it was like a top 10 invaders on like government websites. They call it aggressive, forming dense monotypic stands, displacing native vegetation, destroying waterfowl habitat, quote, reducing its like a marsh's wildlife habitat to roughly that of a parking lot. Okay, but if you do the science, if you hit the university library and look into it, you find that a study of 258 plots of loosestrife found higher bird densities in loosestrife than in native vegetation. Another study of 41 plots found no significant difference in plant species richness, regardless of the percentage of cover of loosestrife. So even in really dense loosestrife stands, you still have equivalent species richness of plants. And in fact, that study found that a number of native species are actually more likely to grow in loosestrife stands than without. Hager and McCoy did a review of this, and they found that little scientific evidence that it has harmful effects, and they stated that, quote, there is currently no scientific justification for the control of loosestrife, but they're spraying millions of pounds of herbicides all over North America to eliminate, in these sensitive wetland habitats, to eliminate loosestrife. Okay, salt cedar. I don't know if you've heard of this one. It's in the arid West. It's been called a disastrous ecological menace, one of the nation's worst weeds. They claim it changes river hydrology, increases flooding, sedimentation, and salinization, crowds out cottonwood, willow, and native species. Yet Julie Stromberg, my friend down there in Arizona, has done extensive studies on this. She found that salt cedar actually enhances plant diversity. Herbaceous species richness and cover is significantly greater in salt cedar than in cottonwood, and stem densities of native woody successional species are equivalent. Burton Anderson, he's a restorationist down on the Colorado, buddy of mine. He found that bird species richness and density in salt cedar is equal to native vegetation, and, quote, biomass and diversity of insects in salt cedar stands is comparable to those in cottonwood and willow. In fact, 90% of the endangered willow flycatcher nest in salt cedar. And almost 30 years ago, there's a vegetation scientist in Utah, Everett. He's pointed out that salt cedar is a symptom of man's disturbance and destruction of river ecosystems. And he recently stated, quote, there is no evidence that it actively displaced native species, nor that it played an active role in changing the hydraulic or morphological properties of the river. I'm sure you've all heard about eucalyptus being bad, like they blamed the Oakland Hills fire on it, and all that. Here's a quote: their silent beauty masks a quiet destructiveness, for they are among the most monstrous organisms on Earth. Outside of their native Australia, their leaves and bark are so toxic that they kill all plants around them and ensure that there will be no competition. Notice the dense stand of native shrubs clustered at the base of this eucalyptus. Those are our native Coyote Bush. And we'll do a transect leading up to it. Okay, this is a transect. These are photographs of the ground approaching this eucalyptus tree. Okay, dense Mediterranean grasses. I think that was at about 8 or 10 meters. Okay, as we start to approach the eucalyptus, see native lupins start appearing. Even more, little Sisyrinchium, yarrow. These are native bunch grasses, and you can see the eucalyptus leaves as we approach the trunk. This is about 5 feet away. See, this is at the base of the eucalyptus. It's 100% native species. Every one of these plants is a native species that actually helps them. This is another, an actual eucalyptus forest. These are all native shrubs, a dense understory of native plants. Okay, you compare the suppression of understory. Look at the total suppression of native plant understory under this invader. This is the redwood, which invaded from the north during the Tertiary. It's not native to California. It didn't evolve here. During the tertiary, that's pretty much between the extinction of the dinosaurs and the ice ages, that during that area. So you see, if we're going to judge an organism by whether it suppresses understory, then we've got the redwood tree. But then all the invasionists should be glad, because I guess we've eliminated 95% of them, right? Let's see, where am I? Okay, again, studies have shown that like 47 species of native birds use eucalyptus. The understory includes 36 plant species. As far as it chemically inhibiting things, 3 centimeters of eucalyptus mulch did not inhibit the germination of native plant seeds. It's preferred habitat for the monarch butterfly overwintering congregations. I think it's 17 out of 23 of the main butterfly congregations are in eucalyptus. The butterflies prefer it. This is part of the integration and acclimatization that was talked about before. Oh, and in fact, in Brazil, eucalyptus buffer zones are protecting native forest and are protecting the endangered lion tamarin, and they're actually helping the native forest regenerate. Let's see. What's next? Okay, and this is what the nativists do to eucalyptus groves, a clear cut. Right, the thing about, I love these pictures. This was from the newspaper after the Oakland Hills fire. Here's a house, here's a car. These are eucalyptus trees in the background. The glow is the fire approaching the camera. Let's see if I can focus that a bit. Okay, that's before and after. You probably can't see this at all, but the house is the house is completely burned, the car is a hulk. The eucalyptus trees that were between the forest, between the fire and the house, are still there, and they still have their leaves. So remember how they were saying, this fire was spread by eucalyptus. Again, well, in science we have a technical term for statements like that. We call them bullshit. Okay, poison hemlock, another so-called invader. Let's look at the use of it by wildlife. This is a native, I believe it's an Allograpta fly, native aphids, spider web. I'll just quickly run through these. Ladybugs, everybody loves ladybugs. Lots of ladybugs, okay. Ladybug children, see? Like in Ladybug, Fly Away Home. Okay, so supposedly nothing eats it. Tell it to that leaf. Here's a normal leaf. Here's one that's defoliated. An interesting beetle. I took all these photos in one afternoon in this stand. And these leaf rollers are really interesting organisms. There's one. And see, look at the number of them. Every one of these things is a leaf roller utilizing the plant. The rich fauna that's been attracted to it attracts predators, like in any ecosystem. There's a spider. And look, here, eggs. I don't know who laid these, but somebody is obviously finding it useful. This is this really neat native bee that utilizes the plant, a moth. And birds are also attracted to this rich insect fauna. And all day while I was taking these photographs, this little mixed species flock was coming and they would periodically visit this stand of hemlock and feed. And they come back later in the season to eat the seeds. And the seeds are poisonous to us. They don't harm the birds at all. There's the birds again. And when I took this picture of this little hemipteran there, I noticed, here's a primate. A primate was attracted to this stand, not to gather food, but to gather knowledge, right? And then immediately afterwards, this deer fly bit me. And it was like, zing, I realized I'm part of this. I'm part of the food web. that extends out from that little stand of hemlock to encompass the whole world. And if you've ever done like intense observational field work, other scientists talk about this, you get these things where it just like suddenly everything becomes clear and sound, and you just get this incredible feeling of joy at the complexity of the world and the beauty of life. So I wanted to thank that fly for helping me to understand. Okay, this is star thistle. Everybody hates star thistle, right? Native bombus bumblebee. That bumblebee is not checking the star thistle's immigration papers. This is another neat little native bee. I forget whether it's a halictid or whatever. I'm not a very good entomologist. I encourage you all to go out into stands of like star thistle, like high noon when it's in full bloom. You will see native pollinators that you never imagined. Okay, that's another little native bee, same one as on the hemlock. This is a neat picture. This predatory spider is hiding using its yellow color. It's like camouflage. It's hiding, waiting for one of the other organisms that's drawn to it. We would call that coevolution, except those beings did not evolve together. And again, predators are attracted. There's lots of spiders. There's another one in the center. I don't know if you can see these slides very well. A native skipper, sort of an underexposed butterfly. Oh, and this is like a midden from one of our native rabbits that had been eating the plant. And here's I don't know if you can see this very well. It's a midden. These were later in the season. One of our native deer mice came and was feasting on the seeds of the plant. And the plant has really deep roots that aerate the soil and bring up nutrients and heal damaged, overgrazed land. Okay, look at this sharp, we call it an ecotone. This is a barbed wire fence. All of this blue-green is star thistle, a really dense stand. But how come the star thistle can't get past the barbed wire fence? The barbed wire can't stop the seeds. This shows that the star thistle, that this is a symptom of differing land use, past land use on either side of the barbed wire fence. I encourage you to start looking at these barbed wire ecotones, I call them. Killer algae, another big hysteria in the Mediterranean. They say it's an aquatic astroturf, it's destroying the place. Let's see. Actually, when it's been studied, they found that it has no effect on the composition or richness of the fish fauna. And it's actually favorable for some fish species. It removes pollution from the water. You normally find these dense stands of algae around areas where there's nutrient loading from sewer pipe outflow. And let's see, epiphytic fauna. That's like little things that live on the algae. That fauna is greater than in native seagrass beds, and it actually helps seagrass reclaim polluted areas. Also, there's another aquatic weed in hydrilla, so they're spraying like herbicide in lakes. It's called Florida's most aggressive plant species, but it actually supports the highest bird species diversity in Florida, and it has the highest fish density with, 6.3 times the density and 5 times the biomass as the native aquatic plant that lives there. So these things can be very beneficial. There's another claim that invasive species, you'll hear this a lot, that they are the second greatest threat to biodiversity. Another buddy of mine in Arizona, ASU, tracked that down, and he found that it was just some biologist who just made that up. And it's actually not true, yes?
Could we be considered an invasive species?
But yeah, by the definition that these people use, we would be considered that, but no, again, the earth is the home of all living beings. We all belong here. Oh, and also the claim that they cause $137 billion a year damage, you're going to hear that all the time. That figure was debunked years ago. It's completely fictitious. The claim that they claim that invasive species cause $137 billion a year damage in the United States. It's just not true. It's fictitious. Okay, let's see where we are. Yeah, now there's probably what you want to hear. Follow the money. Invasion biology has been totally corrupted by the herbicide industry from the beginning. I don't know if you know about like CalEPC, the California Exotic Pest Plant Council. I think they changed the name recently. Founding board member of CalEPC was Nelroy Jackson, and he's a Monsanto employee. Okay, this is a quote from his bio. Okay, he's a founding board member of CalEPC, and he's on the National Invasive Species Council Advisory Committee. He is, quote, product development manager for Monsanto Company with responsibility for the development of industrial turf and ornamental markets in California, Arizona, Nevada, and Hawaii. He has been instrumental in the development of Roundup and rodeo herbicides for vegetation control in the West. I mean, his job is to promote herbicide use, and yet he's a founding board member of CalEPC. Nelroy Jackson. I mean, and I've met him. He's a nice guy, and I'm sure he believes in what he's doing. And that's the thing. I'm sure there's people who are cynically using this just to make money, but there are a lot of people who are really sincere. They care about the planet. They've just been misled. So, I don't want to be spreading divisiveness and hatred, between people. I mean, I'm trying to heal these and diminish the hatred, with the hatred and fear of invasive species. So let's not repeat that among ourselves. Would we tolerate that kind of corruption in any other part of environmentalism? I mean, if the Sierra Club suddenly had a bunch of oil industry executives on it, were getting donations from oil industry, and then they were promoting drilling for oil, we'd be calling their asses on it, I have friends who say that, hey, big enviro has been totally co-opted and corrupted. So, just because someone says they're environmental, or it says green or biodiversity in it, yeah, tune up your bullshit detector, do your homework, and really look at who they are, where their money comes from. Okay, let's see. Okay, yeah, CalEPC. Look at that. They're thanking their sponsors, Dow Elanco, Monsanto. I forgot to highlight Wilbur Ellis down there at the bottom, Herbicide Manufacturers. This is published by the Florida FC Wildland Weeds. Look at their charter advertisers: CPRO, Griffin, Dow AgroSciences, Timberland, American Cyanamid, Helena. A bunch of these are herbicide manufacturers. And a Monsanto booth at a CalEPC meeting. So I always like to tell people, look, if you get in bed with Monsanto, don't blame me if we don't respect you in the morning. Okay, now 30 years ago, or 30 or 40 years ago, the main things we were concerned about in environmentalism were things like chainsaws, bulldozers, herbicides, poison, clear cuts. And now look what's happened in 30 years. All of a sudden, we're being told that the greatest threats to nature are wild plants and animals. And the cure is pesticides, chainsaws, clear cuts, and bulldozers. I have a friend who said, okay, the 60s, right? They won. We didn't win. They also learned from that how to co-opt and destroy grassroots movements like you folks. a friend of mine said, the richest people in the world hired the smartest people in the world, and they pay them to keep you their slaves. So they know how to do this, and if they have been able to con us to the point where we have so-called environmental organizations going 180 degrees and advocating eucalyptus clear cuts and spraying poison in the wildlands, these guys are good at what they do, and we'd better wake up. How am I doing on time? Should I cut this short? Okay, let's see. Okay, this one, you'll have to get my book. I hate to say this, but it's like I studied the whole relationship between invasion biology and racism and xenophobia. And what people don't like to admit, this is Adolf Hitler, and this is Alvin Seifert. This guy was responsible for cleansing the German landscape of foreign plants. Invasion biology originated in Nazi Germany. It has continuing racist connections now. Like if you can stomach going to like the racist websites on the internet, I recommend it, because you better know who your enemies are. But it's really sick. But yeah, they're comparing immigrant peoples and other races with invasive species, and this connection continues to go. So, right, yeah, that's pretty much it. So yeah, it's like it's astroturf activists, these EPCs. They're created by industry. Don't worry about invasive species. They're living beings just like us. They're part of our family. All beings are related. And I guess that's it. And don't forget to love each other.
Pesticides, and they will tell you about their experience and about the help they're not getting from the state. We wanted to bring them in here to have them have you have the chance to hear about. They found us, in our section on Caltrans on our website, don'tspraycalifornia.org. We wanted to, have people understand the reality of the danger they face every day, the reality we face because we too are being exposed to the chemicals that the spray crews are out doing. There are 5 spray crews in Alameda County. They're from San Mateo. 5 spray crews working every day of the week in Alameda County. And they're using, among other things, simazine and Roundup in Alameda County, and they'll tell you about the pesticides being used there. Now, simazine, we have information on simazine back there on the table, or out of the Roundup information, but you can certainly get it from our website. And Connie, I'm sorry, so you're up here already. We're hoping that, you can talk about, I invited them to talk about whatever felt relevant to them. For us also, it's, among other things, the labor angle. They're sent out to do the work, just like the workers in the fields where I lived for many years in Sonoma, and then sickened, and then not helped. Now, Connie can also, I think, help to talk about some of the impacts, the health impacts from the standpoint of working with the Environmental Health Network and learning so much and dealing with these health issues also, as I do and as my family does.
Javier will start. Did you want to have that one to pass to the audience? This was the one.
Well, that'll be for later. Right now.
Okay.
Thanks.
You had that one.
Okay.
Hello, everyone. My name is Javier Alcala. English is my second language, so I write a little note over here so I don't forget what I like to say. I come here today to talk about the real danger of the pesticides. The companies who make these pesticides say their pesticides are safe, but I am an example of the danger of those safety pesticides. I was exposed to pesticides for 6 years working for Caltrans, and even when the mechanics for this company know the spray trucks, we used to spray near different filters resistant to pesticides, but these filters are very expensive, so they prefer to save some money, but workers are getting sick. And after this exposure, I got a lot of symptoms like respiratory problems, asthma, headaches, dizziness, abdominal pain, muscular and joint pain, nausea, diarrhea, blurry vision, memory problems, nervous system disorders, sleep disturbances. I lost part of my sense of smell. Now I have the chronic fatigue syndrome and fibromyalgia. After I get away from working with pesticides and be exposed with another chemicals, now I feel a little better, but my body is very sensitive to any chemical now. If my body smells something that I don't like, I lose my energy. Sometimes I don't even feel my body. I start feel dizzy and get a headaches. I cannot do any physical job now because I get tired very easy. My body doesn't have the energy. That's the damage of they call the safety pesticides. And because the companies who make these pesticides say in the labels, these pesticides are safe to use, when we get sick, it's hard to get the medical help we need because the companies who use these pesticides say the pesticides we are used are safe, and when you get sick, how easy it is for these companies to say you are sick, so now we don't have a job for you. Not only is hard on me, but also in my family. It's hard at times to play with my kids. I have 4 kids, and they like to play with me, but I don't have the energy to do so. So that's the life that what I'm living now. So thank you to take your time to listen.
Okay, my name is Forrest Scullion. I've worked for Caltrans since 1999. Okay, I've worked since 1999. Listening to the other gentlemen, I can help you a little bit. When we go to our pesticide class, the definition for a weed, any plant where you don't want it. We had to memorize that. Okay, I talked to a area superintendent several weeks ago, told him I was going to talk about being poisoned by Caltrans, and the best he could come up with is be factual. He said that in his investigation that everybody did everything right, there was no bad equipment. He didn't say that, but that's what he meant. All the paperwork is correct, so that must mean whatever made me sick was done doing everything correct, because everybody's ass is covered. Okay, about 6 months after I started spraying, I would get like headaches or diarrhea, or your face would be flushed, or you'd feel tired. And you'd think, well, maybe it's because I'm working on the side of the road. I'm not used to working in the sunlight. I'm getting tired, but it never goes away. You get flu symptoms that don't seem to ever go away. You get where you can't breathe. After about a year, 2 times in a row, I had pneumonia, spitting blood. So they said, well, after I did the pneumonia thing, then they said, well, you have to have a doctor saying that you can't spray. So I get a letter from a doctor saying not to spray. So I don't spray, they parse it down, but I can mix the spray and I can drive the trucks that they spray from and I can follow the trucks that are spraying. I keep getting sick, so I go to the doctor again. I end up with a 20% lung capacity left over, have to go on albuterol humidifiers or whatever and sit and be off for several weeks. Go to the doctor, take complete asthma medicine. Come back to work, do the same thing. All the first doctor did was they took away my pay for my qualified applicator's card. Okay. So now I spray, I'm around the spray again, I get sicker, bring in another letter. Nothing happens, I just keep on having to be around the spray. After about 3 years, I bring in a third letter. Finally, they transfer me to where I take care of people doing community service. And I'm not around spray. After about 6 months being sick, I finally stayed out of work 10 months. Sort of, I think I detoxed in 10 months. And as long as I'm not around things like perfume, my wife can't wear perfume, I can't be around petroleum products, I can't be in closed buildings, like this one bothers me a lot. I used to work at Home Depot, can't go to Home Depot anymore. If a building is open, a lot of ventilation, I can be in for a short while. I'm 57, I'm gonna have to work outside the rest of my life, because I can't be in. But everybody's ass is covered, nobody did anything wrong. Word Monsanto. First time I brought a letter in, they had a Monsanto representative come, and he said this stuff is so safe you can drink it, okay? But when we asked him to drink it, he said he did it too much, so he wouldn't do it. But it's like, in the end, the reason I'm telling you what happened to me is it has nothing to do with the moths, but it's the same bureaucracies, the same chemical companies, it's the same everything that they're going to sit there and say it's safe. It's like you can study anything and you can study the wrong thing and you can say it's good, but there's no guarantee. Nobody's saying it's so safe you can drink it, and if you get sick, here's $1 billion we put in escrow to take care of the sick people. Everybody knows a certain amount of people get sick, but nobody has any program to take care of the ones that they finally get sick. Thank you.
Well, hi, my name's Connie. I am the token white middle-aged female on this panel, just so that the stereotype that this is a disease of white middle-aged females will not be completely blown apart. We wouldn't want to have that happen. I'm president of the Environmental Health Network of California, which today, unfortunately, is, well, not this very day, but this year, we are celebrating our 20th year of existence. We were spun off from an older organization called the Environmental Health Association of California, which came into existence precisely because of the medfly spraying that went on in 1981. A lot of people got sick from that and got this illness, got these kind of symptoms that you're talking about. And there are groups for people with chemical sensitivity all over the country. People with symptoms exactly like this, a huge percentage of which got that way from pesticide exposure. It's the #1 way that people develop this illness. National prevalence studies again and again and again have showed consistently that from 10 to 15% of the general population, when asked in surveys if they're unusually sensitive to chemicals, things like perfumes, or smoke and things like that, will say that they are. And of that 10 to 15%, about 5% of them have the fully disabling version that we have. So we are talking about millions of people in this country. Why do you not hear about it? Why is there not outrage about it with so many people getting sick? Well, it's that everybody's ass is covered kind of thing. Simple way to figure out how that works, what the other guy said, follow the money. If you go to any kind of an event for, pest control or vector control or any of those people where those vendors are around and look at the booths, you'll find a couple booths from Bayer. Did you know that Bayer is one of the biggest manufacturers of pesticide on this planet? Did you know that? Well, you see, it's all very simple. The chemical companies are the pesticide companies, are the pharmaceutical companies. And who runs medicine in this country? Who has all the ads in all the medical journals? Who puts up the money that controls the medical schools? That is exactly how it works. If you want to know more about this subject, I can recommend an article that ran in the Townsend Letter for Doctors and Patients back in 2001 called MCS Under Siege by one of our ex-members, Dr. Ann McCampbell. On our website, which is ehnca.org, we've got the official statement of what was then the Chemical Manufacturers Association on their PR plan for discrediting this illness. It is a long-term kind of plan to keep people believing that this is, nothing but crazy neurotic, that it is something that most people have to worry about it. You do have to worry about it. One of the things that we see over and over again in our support groups is when one person is sick and their family has to make the changes that go with their being sick, all the business about not wearing perfume and all those things, very often the well family members, significant others, find that they too are sensitive and they didn't know it. Think of what it was like 40, 45 years ago when all business in this country was done in smoke-filled rooms. And imagine that maybe a couple of people thought, gee, this smoke isn't good for me, and they quit smoking. And they came into those smoke-filled rooms and all of a sudden noticed, all of a sudden that smoke is bothering them. And then the other people in the smoke-filled rooms say to them, gee, there's something wrong with your lungs. You can't tolerate this anymore. No, there's nothing wrong with our lungs. There's something wrong with your room. And what's wrong with it right now is that we have totally, barely regulated chemical industries on all levels where this stuff can just be put out there and put out there and put out there. One of the most disturbing things to me about this entire light brown apple moth thing is the way that this is a recurring pattern. Back in 1981, it was malathion. And at the beginning of this, there was some talk about maybe spraying malathion. But then they decided not to do that. And they said it was for all these wonderful altruistic reasons because of what it would do to this and that ecosystem and things. And they now had these supposedly safer alternatives. I happen to believe that the reason that they won't do it is because we've learned a lot about malathion since 1981. I have buried very much loved friends, and more than just a few, who were poisoned in that initial round of spraying. There is evidence, there is data, there is stuff up the wazoo. So they'll be telling us something else is the latest improvement. It isn't any one of these critters, of these poisons that they keep pushing at us that's the problem. It's the pattern that's the problem. It's the way that they keep saying, oh, let's have a new one, oh, let's have a new one, oh, let's have a new one, and we never have to prove it's safe, and the onus is always on you to get sick and die, enough of you, before we're going to do something about it. We have a right to call a stop to this madness, to call a stop to this ridiculous pattern, and just say, no, you don't have the right to do this. You don't have the right to come in and expose, literally millions of people to stuff that's really not been tested, especially not, in the name of what a lot of people are proving in no uncertain terms is a pretty manufactured threat. We have the right to say no, and it is very, very important that we exercise that right. Even if it looks like we're not going to win at some points, it is important, it is vitally important to get out there and to do that. I think of my friends, some of them very big activists in our community who are dead now. And when I look at the fact that they will no longer use that awful poison, in the same way, I get just, it's hard to even communicate how mad I get about it, about this recurring pattern of, oh no, let's go on to the next poison. The data that we have that can prove how awful that stuff is was bought with the lives of people that I care about. And I don't want to see that go to waste. I just don't. So I am going to be out there on the front lines, and the people who have chemical sensitivity are going to be out there on the front lines saying no to the entire program. Not just no to the aerial spraying, even though that is, an order of magnitude worse than a lot of the rest of it, but no to all of it, because all of it is unnecessary. All of it poisons people, and all of it repeats this awful pattern that has got to stop if we're going to have anything resembling a sustainable future. It has to. A halt has to be called.
I want to jump in here. Thank you. Thank you so much for speaking out, and thank you, Connie, for giving more of this history, too, of people fighting. This is not a brand new fight, and part of what we, with our organization, have tried to do over time is to help people understand that while we're working with this light brown apple moth issue right now, it's not just this program, and we would be I would assert we would be mistaken if we focused only on this program. It is one of many, and what I want you to understand too is we've been hearing aerial spraying, aerial spraying, aerial spraying. We all agree it's a horror to, and you know, I am a victim of the medfly sprayings also. I grew up in Southern California, and in North Hollywood, which turned out to be one of what they call the hot spots, the areas they kept going over and going over and going over and going over with malathion. Now, in this program here right now, there are many toxic pesticides being used in many fashions. In fact, in Sonoma now, the CDFA was just up there on Monday. They are about to hang these twist ties unless we stop them. That's we. These twist ties are impregnated with the pheromones, the synthetic pheromones. You start, when you look at the material safety data sheets, you see a lot of the same active ingredients as with the Checkmate, the aerial spray, and a list of undisclosed ingredients, which is the theme that runs through all these programs. So we don't even have the ability to have independent scientists evaluate them. They are covered by proprietary laws. If you go onto our website, you can read some of my exchanges with Cedar, and they're refusing to release the ingredients, even the active ingredients, of the pheromone product that's in the traps. Now, some activists keep talking about sticky traps. These are not just sticky traps, and people have to stop that. They have to, because right now these traps are going up all over the state. Steve Lyle suggested that he would give me information. Steve Lyle, who's the head of the CDFA's, what's his actual title? The Office of PR. I made requests for information about this program and what's going on in the different areas where my children and I spend time in this state. And he basically ran down a line of, well, it's going to cost you $3,000. So imagine this. These traps are going up. Traps are going up in all kinds of locations and at heights where children, you know, will climb to them in trees. These twist ties, imagine, you know, cats and kids up in trees batting them around. You know, the pheromones, people just don't want to believe that it's toxic. These are made by Cedar. The product is called Centurion. I was exposed to it in the agricultural office of the head of the Alameda County, the office of the trapping program for the light brown apple moth. I was exposed to the twist ties, and then just moments later, the pheromone products in this. I was so kindly offered the ability to see these things, stupidly, because I was being affected, I'm sure, by the chemicals in there already. I just assumed they would bring me out photographs. They brought out the real thing. Well, you want to see a trap? Brought out the real thing, and then threw down these packets. They were enclosed, but it was a bunch of the Centurion packets in a plastic baggie, and I was reeling, and I had to jump out of the chair and was going backward. That's even with my mask, with a couple layers of carbon filtration. I already had this thing on, and I was immediately, it was like the arrow through the head, the nausea, the dizziness, all of it. And we just have to get real. So if somebody starts talking to you about just the aerial spraying, start asking why people are not, you know, being real about this stuff. These are intended to saturate the environment. That's the kind of language you hear on the Cedar website. Saturate the environment with the pheromones. It's not the idea that, you know, the moth has to come up to it to smell it. No, the idea is that they're placed all over so that the whole area is saturated with. So that means we are all exposed to. Not for one time, this is for years on end. They keep rehanging. When the chemical is a little depleted, they get a new one and rehang. When the chemical is depleted, they get a new one and rehang.
Can I say something about that? One of the things that really concerns me about this whole switch to pheromones that is being touted as the next thing, you know, so much safer than the older pesticides. Older pesticides, whatever you want to call them, standard pesticides, work by killing. They kill immediately, all right? So consequently, the active dose, the level that you need to do that killing, only has to be in the environment for a very short time, because the idea is you kill and then it goes away. Now, as they break down, you know, a lot of them do break down relatively quickly, at least compared to the ones that we had 20 and 30 years ago. But the things they break down into are still toxic. So, you know, I don't want to be saying that that's really safe. But this pheromone business is a whole different concept. Because the idea isn't to kill them, it's to mess with their mating behavior. But in order to mess with their mating behavior, you have to have the stuff in the air at a concentration to do that all the time that they're mating. Which, in the case of this moth, is every single month, is, you know, every hour of every day of every single month in which it's not raining. You know, this is very different. This means having that amount of stuff there all the time. So anyone or any species, anything that's got an issue with it, you know, is basically going to have to deal with it all the time. If you're a person who's sensitive to this stuff, you can't just go away when they spray and come back, because it's designed to keep releasing into the environment at that same level for these long periods of time. And in order to do that, they have to have a delivery method that will somehow keep it coming out, whether it's the little plastic pellets, or whether it's plastic flakes, or whether it's the twist ties. And no matter how you slice it, that means that something in those delivery systems that we aren't being told what it is, mostly because it's proprietary and, you know, we aren't allowed to know, that has to be breaking down too, for all that time, constantly, you know? And I just intuitively, I don't see really how in the long run this is going to be so all-fired much safer. So many of our environmental allies are going, well, it's a pheromone, you know, so obviously it's going to have less environmental impacts. I don't think it's so obvious at all. And from the reports that we've been getting from the chemically sensitive people down in Santa Cruz who went through this, it is, and Monterey, it just hasn't been the case. They say this is like no pesticide that they have ever lived through, that many of the effects were worse. One of the weirdest things, you can't get rid of it by washing it off your property. You try to hose down your property and wash it off, and all of a sudden you get blasted with the stuff again. You get more of it coming at you, you know, not less. And there's a whole lot of things like that we're going to be finding out as time goes on. But, you know, just have your skeptical ears up when they tell you that because it's a pheromone, it's necessarily going to be safer. We don't know that. All we know is that it's not going to be unsafe in the exact same way that the last generation of stuff was unsafe. And they always want you to believe that if they found something that's not unsafe in the same way, therefore it's safe. No, that does not logically follow. And we have to get out there and say that. No, you don't know that it's safe. It hasn't been tested. And there's every reason to believe that putting something out there into the environment that's got to be there at a steady state level for long periods of time is going to have some major impacts, you know, and on human beings, on ecosystems, on all of it.
I just want to mention the other couple significant ways of delivery of the chemicals in this program. That would be permethrins on utility poles, mixed with the pheromones too, either painted on utility poles or splatted on in a goop that in a photo looks like Cool Whip. And so again, kids up telephones and on trees also. Kids up poles and on up trees would be interacting, all the critters, interacting, then taking it down, tracking it all over. Another thing is the ground spraying all around people's homes, around parks, around public places, everywhere. This is the reality. It's a widespread program, but it's not just this program, it's these programs. There are funding mechanisms. This is very beneficial to agricultural departments across the state, as was the glassy-wing sharpshooter program. We'll continue to have these programs coming at us. And so, that's the politics we face. These are the health realities we face. And we hope that in the brainstorming session after Dr. Harder speaks, that, people who want to provide support for and form a campaign around stopping roadside spraying in these counties will come together to do that, and that those who are willing to go out and start doing some more of the door-to-door to warn people about the dangers of the twist ties will let us know, and we can help get you the information to go door-to-door. Right now in Sonoma, that's needed. And so we'll go on with brainstorming, and thank you all for being here, and invite Dr. Daniel Harder up here. So, Dr. Daniel Harder. So his report, along with Jeff Rosendale, he went to New Zealand early in the year, did a study, was looking at what's the LBAM mean in New Zealand, and he will. I think I don't need to do any more introduction, but thank you very much for coming, and we will go from Dr. Harder into the brainstorm.
Thank you, and it's never taken me 3 hours to come from Santa Cruz to here, but today it did. So I'm glad you were able to accommodate my coming. I followed this issue since the discovery of the moth. I'm a director of a botanical garden, one of the top 10 botanical gardens in the country at the University of California, Santa Cruz. I don't know if you've been to the Arboretum, but it has large collections of Australian and New Zealand plants, and if I was to believe what CDFA was saying early on, I was going to be spraying for this moth as it took down my collections, and the value of what I have in my collections would be decreased, and I was not willing to spend the rest of my career spraying for an insect. We have since we do have Australian and New Zealand collections at the Arboretum, those are built through collaborations with New Zealanders and with people in Australia, and we simply picked up the phone and said, how come you've never told us about the light brown apple moth and what's going on, and tell us about it. And those telephone calls turned into sharing of scientific papers, and it precipitated into a trip to New Zealand to talk to the people who really did know what's going on with the light brown apple moth and controlling it, understanding it. And there are lots of difficulties I see with the CDFA program, and we can talk a little bit about those, but I've summarized a very short presentation just of facts. I've stuck with the facts. I was trained here at UC Berkeley to understand, one, how to find literature, how to find background information, how to source. I did, essentially for the light brown apple moth, I prepared myself to do a dissertation on this thing. So I collected all the literature, contacted all the researchers in the field on light brown apple moth, and have a really good idea of what that moth is all about. Believe me, nowhere in the world where it occurs naturally, in Australia, or anywhere else in the world where it's been naturalized, including Hawaii, the British Isles, New Zealand, it is not a pest. It is not a pest of economic concern. It is a pest of economic incentive for CDFA and to support a bogus eradication program that will not work. Number one fact, all the techniques, everything they're trying, splat, aerial, sticky traps, everything will not work to eradicate the pest. This is a long-term eradication program that will open up the floodgates for CDFA to have emergency money come from the federal government. There is no way they can eliminate this insect, which has spread now in California from our known trapping. They've never trapped outside of California. They've had several traps in Florida last year for the first time. And on June 1st, a few days ago, they started a national survey looking for LBAM. So they don't even know if it occurs in Alabama or North Carolina and in any other state in the Union. They only know it occurs in California because they put traps there. And early on in the trapping, you realize that they found a moth here because they put a trap there. Then they started putting 20 traps there. Then they put 3,200 traps. And of course, it just kept going up with numbers of moths they found. These are traps that are very selective for bringing in light brown apple moth, but they can't bring them in from miles and miles away. So you simply, by where you place the trap, will tell you where the moth is. And so that's the only credit I give to CDFA in this, is that they've learned how to trap the light brown apple moth in California. That's it. That's the only success they've had, because everything else is rather bogus. So the statement of emergency to eliminate this pest is totally bogus as well, because there is no crop damage. No one has reported any crop damage, measurable crop damage, or in ornamental gardens. I know what LBAM looks like. I know what LBAM damage looks like. It looks exactly like our 300 other tortricid moths in California, the same type of damage. There are orange tortrix and omnivorous leaf roller, and there are the brown tortrix, moths native to California that do exactly the same thing. And for instance, in differential trapping in Watsonville at the Arboretum, we've been able to put up traps for light brown apple moth, omnivorous leaf roller, and orange tortrix moth, and we're catching 150 orange tortrix male moths to one LBAM. So there is no way, unless you're a taxonomist, to differentiate between a native moth and an adult LBAM, unless you're a taxonomist. And it's impossible to do it as a larvae. So if they pick up a larvae and they say, oh, that's LBAM, there's no way unless they actually looked at the DNA. No one is capable of looking at a larvae and telling you it's a light brown apple moth. So what they're counting early on, the traps were messed up with a bunch of different kinds of moths. CDFA claimed lots of false positives, which meant shutting down nurseries, causing economic hardship on these nurseries to spray organophosphate pesticides, which kill everything. You know, they're essentially a sterilizer, which kills all the predators. And in New Zealand, light brown apple moth is controlled to 80 to 90% by native predators. This means spiders, birds, earwigs, anything. In California, we have 300, as I said, we have 300 species of moth in this family already. There already are native wasps and predators feeding on these things. Light brown apple moth, and New Zealanders told us this, it has been naturalized here. It's covering now an area in California the size of Connecticut, 8,000 square miles. This is the largest eradication program effort ever to eliminate an insect. And it is unprecedented. The substances they are using, the tactics they are using, just will not work. Simply, that's the fact. And that's something that, unless you're bringing science to support the spray, they don't want to hear anything about it. Absolutely, they do not want to hear anything about the real science. And here's some other facts. The light brown apple moth has probably been in California for 30 to 50 years. Invasion biologist Jim Carey at UC Davis, who is the other UC researcher who's ever spoken out about the light brown apple moth, because UC researchers are beholden to CDFA for their research money, so they do not speak out against CDFA. They're not signing any petitions against the spray, but they're also not speaking out. And so being the first person to speak out from the University of California, I was very nervous about sticking my neck out about an issue such as this until Jim Carey came on board, because he knows. He's worked at the MedFly program for 21 years, and he worked on comparative invasions of other moths like the gypsy moth, which took 40 years to go from one backyard to another backyard. And a gypsy moth is a strong flyer. Gypsy moth can fly kilometers at a time. The light brown apple moth on average will fly 300 feet in its adult lifetime, and that's it. Most of them do not fly any further than the next bush, because if the resource that they're exploiting is raising their young, they will relay their eggs on the same bush. And that's detrimental to their own survival, because if they lay a lot of eggs on that bush, the predators come back, they respond to the food source that's there, and they are eliminated. We've seen this at the Arboretum over and over again. We'll see tortricid moths occupying a bush, and within 2 weeks there are no life forms left. There are lots of spiders, there are lots of other things looking for food on there, but there are no light brown apple moth and no larvae. Here's another fact. The light brown apple moth is easy to manage and can be safely managed, and this is the key point, in agriculture. There's no reason to involve any urban populations in this because the tools necessary to control the light brown apple moth to 0 tolerance. So there is no trade restrictions of having this moth go to Canada or Mexico. Those are all ridiculous claims that Canada and Mexico are preventing us from shipping our stuff. There are techniques developed in New Zealand by these fantastic researchers because they wanted to get their apples into the United States. They could not have any LBAM on any apple shipments, so they worked out technologies to eliminate every life form of LBAM by using very soft techniques. And a major component of the control for light brown apple moth in New Zealand is monitoring, using pheromone-baited traps to understand the population levels in a particular orchard, and based on a threshold level of 30 moths per month, which has never been seen in any trap in California, that is the deciding point of whether they're going to treat that nursery or not. And oftentimes, it's only a single treatment for the entire season to control the moths. They target the control to a population when it's beginning to increase in the springtime, like we just saw in the last couple of months. It's been rather cold, so cool, so they're not seeing the rise. They're saying they're not seeing the rise in the populations. But as that population's rising, as those larvae are turning into pupae and pupating into adults, that's when they hit this target, and it can actually control the insect to 0 numbers in an orchard with one treatment of what's called an insect growth regulator, which is a very good tool in agriculture. Certainly shouldn't be sprayed over anybody, nor on anyone. The pheromone technology, despite what CDFA has claimed, it's never been used in human populations. This substance has never been tested on humans, nor on animals, and it's never actually. This technique has never been successful in eradicating anything. This is a behavior modifier. It prevents them from mating. But it doesn't make any sense to me. If you throw a pheromone out into the environment and it's all in this one concentration in this room, and you've got a female up on the top there and you've got a female over there emitting a very concentrated stream of pheromone, the males will be able to pick up those streams from those females because the air is already saturated with it. And this is a living organism. It's not just going to go away because you stopped it from mating. It's going to not target that substance anymore. It's going to find out, hey, I'm not mating using that substance, and all those are going to die off. But there are going to be moths that are going, hey, I don't respond to that anymore. I need to find those females, and they will do it. And it can happen, and it will happen. There's precedent for it. And I said, like I said, light brown apple moth can mostly be controlled by predators, native predators, and very common native predators. And as I said, spiders are the #1 predator in New Zealand of light brown apple moth. And when New Zealand eliminated the use of broad-spectrum pesticides, organophosphates, which California is now requiring retail nurseries to use, this substance is a broad-spectrum pesticide. It not only kills and controls light brown apple moth really well, it also kills everything else. So essentially you have this sterile environment which has no natural controls. And once you start tweaking those, that's when the light brown apple moth becomes a problem. If you continue to expose any organism to a substance for a long enough period of time, that they become resistant to it. And that's what happened in New Zealand. A single simple gene change in one cluster of light brown apple moth in an orchard in Nelson, New Zealand, became resistant to organophosphates. And so they panicked because they had no recourse to try to control these things. So what they did is applied the pesticides 26 times from the ground and from the air in this orchard to eliminate this one population. It's the only successful eradication of a moth anywhere on the planet. And that's something to be said. And it was overkill. They did not want this moth, none of these populations, to get out because they had no means of controlling it. It's not simply a pheromone. It's a chemical mix of things. Everybody knows this. They keep talking about, when you hear what CDFA is talking about, they're talking about the active ingredient, this pheromone. They're not talking about the 84% of the other stuff that's in there, including the plastic carrier, which is a technology that's developed for the military. Military budgets, Department of Defense budget developed this microencapsulation technology for mind control, controlling people, and controlling out protests. And it's a very interesting technology, but it's breathable. And it's been called on some of the facts that CDFA has been spouting about the size of these particles. Some independent people in Monterey looked at the same thing, the same data, and said, wait, you're misinterpreting it. And CDFA claimed that they were right, that these people were right, and that over 50% of the formulation is a breathable particle size, which would lodge deep in the lung and can cause problems. Long-term health effects are unknown. Years of aerial spraying may damage the local economy. In Santa Cruz and Monterey County, realtors now have to disclose to potential buyers of homes that they're going to be under the spray zone. Tourists and tourist websites, including Fodors, is now saying that light brown apple moth aerial spray program is in effect, and you might not want to come to Santa Cruz or Monterey County in the summertime because that's when they're going to be spraying. So they'll be coming in the wintertime when it's raining and miserable, and what kind of responsibility is there for people coming that are innocent, totally innocent, to coming to a county that's under the spray? And so it has economic effects, including property values, difficulties with, it's going to affect the economy of California in other ways that have not been measured up till now. I'm concerned particularly with the effects on other moths, and I've been looking in these sticky traps for months now, over a year now, and just peeking in. Every couple days I'll go on my way to work, I pass at least 6 traps. I can stop along the road, just take a peek in. I see what looks like light brown apple moth in there, but I also see other organisms in there. These other organisms responding to this pheromone as well, including other moths. So I'm concerned if we're dumping this throughout our environment, absolutely unmeasured conditions and concerns about other organisms. It's not even going to be tracked because there is no environmental monitoring in this program. There is nothing looking at, and these species, although they are quite prolific, are baseline food sources for everything. Maybe for even our salmon, maybe the mayflies, maybe everything. These are non-distinct little packages of protein. Everything likes to eat them. And what happens if you're eliminating a food source that a spider population is so necessarily dependent on, and you eliminate that spider population? What does it mean? What does it mean for an ecosystem? Well, I can tell you what it's going to mean. It's going to cause other problems that we're not even thinking about, and unforeseen problems of population outbreaks, other kinds of pests, who knows? And it's unknown. So I'm really concerned about what's happening in other species with this program. And let's see. I also asked Jim Carey to provide me with some points about LBAM. Jim Carey has been misquoted about the safety of this pheromone concoction because he recently signed a letter with 2 entomological colleagues from Davis, who was the main advisor of the Strawberry Commission and works on strawberry diseases, and another guy, Bruce Hammock, who's a toxicologist from Davis. And Bruce Hammond they were interviewed last week, and Bruce Hammond said, well, this stuff is not, it's less safe than it's more safe than a hot dog, and, and a milkshake is worse, and people have associated Jim Carey with that statement, and Jim has regretted the fact that statement has come out, because, it's ridiculous to say it's comparing it to a food. So I've got a few points from Jim Carey, and then I'd like to open to questions. I get more out of the questions. I know you will as well. In this case, everything flows from the USDA. This is an incredibly high-pressure program that's being forwarded by the USDA. USDA placed light brown apple moth as a Class A actionable pest, which means if you find one of them, you have to set up quarantines and try to control it. It's not a good farming practice. It's not like I find damage on this plant, I'm going to figure out what it is and take care of that insect. This is one, if it's present, it needs to be dealt with in a quarantine way, and it can prevent commodity movements and affect our economy. And so it's on the blacklist. It's a Class A pest. It's really important to remember that USDA established this precedent, and USDA probably established this pest without clear biological review of what this pest can do. Since it hasn't caused any damage here, and in all the other places it's been, New Zealand has been there for 140 years. England, for instance, Kew Gardens, another botanical collection. I contacted the director there. I said, I know light brown apple moth is ubiquitous in the UK. How much of a threat is it to your collections there? And they said absolutely zero. We do not even differentiate between any other leaf roller and the light brown apple moth. And if we ever have an outbreak, we don't use any controls besides either releasing native wasps or use something very soft to control it. And it's very spotty. And they say it's not a species of concern for them in England at all. And it's been there over 100 years. Why would CDFA expect it's going to be biologically different here in California? It makes no sense to me. They told me that I'm not qualified to speak out about light brown apple moth because I'm a botanist. Well, it affects what they say, 2,500 different species of plants. This is one moth. I think it's actually a plant issue that's more important here than it is in the moth itself. And really, in all the issues about the moth, just remember and say to yourself, the eradication is not going to work, and the moth is not the issue. The moth is the vehicle to bring emergency money to California to save these budgets, to keep these programs going, and to have this decade-long eradication program, which CDFA defines eradication as no captured moths within 2 generations. To me, eradication means eliminate forever. Well, their success, and medfly is the same thing. You can reduce the population. Okay, you have a spike in a population here. You treat that area. You bring the population down below monitoring levels. But you never really eliminate it. It's always there. And Jim Carey showed by his work with medfly that these areas are exactly the same areas that can become reoccupied with new according to CDFA, new populations of medfly and moths. And that's not true. It just goes below monitoring. If you've got a trap 2 blocks away, you're not going to see anything in this area where this moth is. And so they're not, the monitoring program is completely a mess, and it has a lot of science and technology to it, but CDFA is not doing it the right way. If you drive along the road, there are the traps. They're not on a grid, they're along the roads. You know, there is no science to it. In fact, I had 2 CDFA researchers come to the Arboretum. You know, I think it's actually to keep an eye on me and to touch base with me and try to find a soft spot. But 2 CDFA researchers came to the Arboretum to do different studies. One guy wanted to look at host plants because Golden Gate Park has one species of leptospermum, which is very infested in Golden Gate Park. Well, 80% of the plantings in Golden Gate Park are this species. And they're all left over from the exposition in the turn of the century. Which those plants came over on greenhouse ships in pots, of course without inspections. They came over on greenhouse-top ships and were brought here. So light brown apple moth could easily have come with those shipments of plants over 100 years ago. They wanted to look, one researcher wanted to look at host plants, wanted to look at the same species at the Arboretum, couldn't find light brown apple moth on it at all at the Arboretum because we've got 4 plants and that's all. And another researcher was there collecting larvae to see what parasites come out of it. So essentially just collecting larvae, growing up, and seeing if it turns into a moth or does it release wasps or what. And if you think about those 2 projects, one guy wants to know what's going on with this host plant. The other guy is collecting the larvae right off these plants saying, hey, I got another one. So they work for the same person. There was no coordination. One CDFA researcher didn't even have a notebook to write anything and didn't say what the host species was or anything. Didn't even count how many larvae he had. And spent 45 minutes, drove 3 hours to come to Santa Cruz, turned around, spent 45 minutes there collecting larvae, and got back in the car and left. He says, I got to go, I can't spend much time here. Yeah, so one of the researchers has now been eliminated from working at the Arboretum because one was taking the larvae, the other person was interested in following. So they were, it was ridiculous. So what's behind that? Well, LBAM is extremely widespread. I've already said that 12 counties, 8 to 10,000 square miles, deeply entrenched. We would call that naturalized here. You can find it, it's reproducing, it's reoccupying new spaces. It's a naturalized invader that now is part of our flora and fauna. Alabama is a long-term resident. It's probably here 30 to 50 years. I told you about the gypsy moth. Pheromones have never been used to eradicate any widespread insect population, and there is no exception to that. This is all an experiment. Doesn't have my consent to spray me, and if it's an experiment, they have to have our consent. So that's the point I've been pushing over and over again. I do not want to be part of an experiment that 20 years from now I'm going to find out that it was detrimental for us to be anywhere near that stuff. It took 20 years to get asbestos out. Eradication programs are extreme successes are really rare. I talked about the New Zealand one. CDFA and USDA have spent over $250 million trying to eradicate fruit flies, medfly, in California over the last 30 years. Despite their declarations, it has not been successful. For example, there have been over 170 independent eradication projects on just the medfly. The independent projects. After they eradicated an area, lower it below monitoring. That's a successful eradication. Next time it comes up there, oh, we got to have another emergency order. Money flowing from the USDA to continue this program. In over 170 emergency eradication projects on just the medfly and the oriental fruit fly alone for nearly 6 emergency orders per year. And the CDFA has organized the law and changed the law so that they have this ultimate power that they can just say, oh, I can come on your property and put up twist ties. I can come on your property and spray you. I can fly over your house at 300 to 500 feet, which is quite frightening if you've ever seen a plane going 120 miles an hour over the top of your house. It's really frightening, and they think they have a right to do that. But if you look at an aerial photo of San Francisco particularly, or Santa Cruz, what do you see? Flat streets, roofs. What happens on roofs? It all gets concentrated into pipes, and it goes in the street, it gets concentrated into other pipes. Sutera, and if you look at the labeling of that product of using pheromones, concentration is not what you want. You want to have a flat area, equal distribution of this pheromone, so the concentration's equal all over. Once it concentrates in one corner, if this was an area and this table was leaned up, they'd all be over here. Those moths wouldn't even be affected by it. It would all be here. And what happens? It goes into the waters and the streams, and Marin County gets all its water from surface water, so all of it's going to go into usable water. And who knows what concerns and problems that could be. LBAM has caused zero economic damage in California. The economic impact reports produced by CDFA would not be publishable in any scholarly journal, and we've questioned every one of their assessments on potential economic damage in California because it was under a regime of using broad-spectrum organophosphate pesticides in those countries, and anything prior to 2003 is a suspect study because organophosphates were eliminated in 2003. Organophosphates, again, killed everything else and allowed LBAM to come to destructive levels. And that's not going to happen here. There are strategic alternatives to eradication, like containing it or understanding the spread, but honestly, they haven't done enough trapping to know even where it is, to be able to know how extensive it is. They're threatening that it's going to enter the Central Valley. Well, light brown apple moth likes England. It likes coastal New Zealand. It likes coastal California. It likes between 40 and 80. Anything higher than that, the population shut down. Even in controlled studies in the lab, above 85 degrees, light brown apple moth won't reproduce. Well, okay, what about Merced in the summer? Yeah, I mean, it's not going to do well in the Central Valley, so it's probably not even going to get to the Central Valley, and if it does, it's not going to do well there. Not all California farmers, growers, and nursery owners believe that a program of eradication is either desirable or that eradication is achievable, and Jim Carey has asked many independent entomologists whether they think eradication is feasible. I asked a USDA inspector at the Arboretum today, and I got him to admit that he thought eradication was a real stretch. And I thought that was great. He says, I'm not supposed to say this, but this is the scary part. Pheromones are extremely persistent. 17 years after the last known direct contact of the gypsy moth pheromone disparler, Penn State entomologist Alan Cameron retained attractiveness to gypsy moth. It absorbed into his skin. He hadn't been around it for 17 years, and he was still able to attract gypsy moth. He would go into an area where gypsy moth is, and gypsy moth would come to them. And we've heard other stories of people who put up pheromone traps in their warehouses. They want to know when a certain moth is, starting to eat its flower or something that's stored there. They have these moths these traps that release pheromone. People have told us that they come out of these warehouses and they'll go to a Sam's Club or a grocery store, and moths will come over and land on them because and people thought, it's on my clothes. Well, that's not true. They actually changed their clothes, went into the same store, and it's in their skin. We don't know about this. We don't know about the transdermal properties of pheromones. What does it mean to have a concentration of pheromones on our skin for 10 years, 3, 5, 10 years? And that's what they're achieving here. All the new studies that they're doing in New Zealand about new formulations is to make a more persistent, stronger formulation, so they don't have to fly planes over the house every month. They can do it every 2 months or every 3 months. But believe me, that is going to be a much stronger, persistent product because they want to maintain an equal concentration for over 90 days. And anytime you talk about spread or equal concentrations of pheromones and saturating the environment, this only works under a very rigid set of conditions. In New Zealand, we learned this. You need to have a single block of plants, a single canopy height. It has to be level. How many places like that are any of these inland valleys or anywhere along the coast where it's level, single canopy height? I mean, that's agriculture. Let's leave the tools in ag. Let them do what they want in ag. But that's ridiculous to think that you can spray it over an area that's obviously not within the conditions necessary to have this pheromone work. And believe me, you know this, air masses move one way during the day and air masses move the other way at night. These things are in the air. They're going to move with those air masses. They're going to be concentrating in the valley bottoms and not being effective at all. So again, eradication will not work in any of its forms, and we should oppose every bit of it. The LBAM eradication program is unnecessary because the pest status of LBAM is no different than other similar reef blowers already in California. The eradication program will be ineffective and wasteful because the use of pheromones to disrupt mating will be ineffective. The only difference between an LBAM in which a pheromone is sprayed aerially versus one in which no aerial spray occurs is that the former, over 7 million people are exposed to this pheromone, and whereas in the latter, people are not exposed to the pheromone. But in both of these programs, the LBAM would remain in the state and continue to cause little or no damage. Think about this moth. I mean, it's a mechanism of control. We can tell New Zealand if they've got it on their apples, don't send them to us. New Zealand just takes them, sends them to Europe because they don't have the same restrictions. It's a control mechanism for citrus out of Australia. It's a control mechanism. This is a moth that causes no damage. It's a perfect cash cow for CDFA. This moth, even if they try to eradicate it, they can show some success. They can show our nursery trading partners we're flying over and we're spraying and taking care of this moth. But after the years and years they're proposing to do this, light brown apple moth will still be an issue in the state. It will not cause any economic losses. And they've had this program for 10 years. They can admit success and they can say, well, it's free. Now light brown apple moth can do whatever it wants, after they fail. And it's still not going to cause any damage in ag. So it's a perfect cash cow for CDFA in controlling budgets. And it's been really frustrating for me, and I really enjoy going out. I do a lot of road work about the light brown apple moth. And this is happening. This is not, CDFA is not talking about stopping anything. There was an ag meeting yesterday. This is a train moving. This is a $100 million train moving, and it's going to be very hard for us to stop it. Everybody needs to join together and do something, to be fired up enough to write a letter to Governor Schwarzenegger and Nancy Pelosi, people who can really try to make a change. Because what really needs to happen, this moth needs to be reclassified from this dangerous Class A pest to one that doesn't need any controls. New Zealand would welcome it. They've been fighting this thing forever just to get apples into the United States. Everybody would welcome it. The government waste thing and wasting money, nobody really cares about that. I mean, that's not really an issue, but I certainly don't want to be involved in an experimental eradication program that's not going to work. It's going to expose me and my children and my family to toxins that have never been tested on people, and I don't want to be a guinea pig in this whole thing. Thank you.